Your source for everything paranormal. Parax.
Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to Channeling History. By now, you should know that we are the only show that talks to all of the departed guests, and we are brought to you every Sunday on the Parax Radio Network. I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I will be bringing you the words of our spirit guests tonight.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host. Tonight we're going to channel with the spirit of Ulysses Grant. He's the 18th President of the United States, as well as one of the most effective Union generals during the Civil War.
Yeah, we have channeled with him quite a few times before, and anybody that knows me know that I'm a nut about the Civil War, so I've been really looking forward to tonight. Well, we always try to bring a small disclaimer, so no matter what we say or what we discuss, there's always going to be somebody disagreeing with us. So the opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect the Parax Network or our sponsors.
Last week we interviewed the spirit of the famous industrialist Henry Ford. He spoke of many different subjects, and we think that you would find this very interesting. All of our past shows are available on our YouTube channel. It's in Barry's name, and all of our shows are available at no charge. We now have 230 videos available for viewing. We welcome any questions that are submitted through the Parax chat room.
Now, when we begin our channeling tonight, Connie will ask the questions, and I'll answer those questions in the words of the spirits. But before we channel, we always say a prayer of protection. This is going to be a very interesting show tonight. We need to get started. So Connie, say the prayer and we will begin.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God. Amen.
Okay, Connie, let's begin with President Grant.
Ulysses, welcome to our show. We're so happy to have you. Would you like to begin with a message?
Yes, actually I would. I lived through some of the most troubled times that the United States has ever seen. The Civil War was a terrible, terrible time. I cannot describe what it was like to see so many of the young boys killed on both sides. Both sides felt that God was with them. And it was just a long and terrible time for all of us. When I was elected president, it was a very difficult time because the South had been destroyed by our forces and it was time for reconstruction. It was a time that people were still opposed to the African American community, and I did truly try to do my best as president. As I said, there was so much graft and corruption as a result of the war. There was so much hatred that was still remaining that it was just simply a very, very difficult time. So I know that you have a bunch of questions, and I'm here to answer for them. So Connie, if you want to begin, let's get on with it.
Thank you. Would you start out by telling us about your parents, please?
My father was a very strict abolitionist. He did not believe in slavery and spoke strongly against it. My mother was a member of the Methodist faith, was a very religious person. We lived in rural America, I grew up on a farm. I did have many opportunities to learn. My father did enroll me in many different institutions, and I had a very good education for the time.
Okay, your parents named you Hiram. How did you get the name Ulysses S. Grant?
My father decided that I should go to West Point, the military academy. The senator that recommended me got mixed up with my name and submitted my name as Ulysses S. Grant and dropped the Hiram, which did not upset me at the time. They would not correct it, so I simply went to the military academy and used the name Ulysses.
Okay, as you said, your parents were Methodists and abolitionists. What were your religious beliefs?
I always tried to keep my religious beliefs to myself. I believed in a divine power. I did not attend any churches. I just thought that many of the teachings of them were not exactly what I hoped that they would be. I did truly believe in God, but I did not feel that my beliefs should be something that could be attacked in public. So I just simply kept my mouth shut. I know many people thought that I was an agnostic and could not prove or disapprove of the existence of God, but they were mistaken. It was just simply that I was very private about my spiritual beliefs.
You attended West Point. Did you want a military education?
Not in the beginning. I felt that it was going to be the best way to advance myself, and I thought that maybe a military career would be best for me. West Point was very small in those days. Our classes were not having many people in them, and it was just very small and very intense. There was a lot of hazing. There were some times that I almost considered leaving West Point. I thought that I would graduate, go into the military, serve my 4 years, and go on to do something else. The day that I left the military academy, I had incredibly mixed emotions. In many ways, it was my best of days, and in many ways, it was the worst of days. Many of my friends in the class subsequently decided to fight for the South. I was very sad to see that, but those people followed what their true beliefs were, and I certainly cannot fault them for that.
What was your general opinion of West Point?
As I said, some good, some bad. I enjoyed many of the professors. I had people actually teach me art in a military academy. It was very strict, and as a young person, I did not truly appreciate living under such direct commands. But it is a wonderful school. It gave me a great education, and it set me up that I could truly learn military tactics. And I think that it was my education at West Point that truly made me a successful general officer.
You graduated from West Point in 1843. Who were some of the other members of your graduating class? Would any of their names sound familiar to us?
Well, Bob Lee was one of them. He went on to command Southern forces, and he was their best general. I was truly sorry when he went south because he had to resign his commission in the Union Army to assume command of Confederate forces. But he was a good friend, and he was a very worthy opponent at war.
You saw your first combat in the Mexican-American War in 1846. What was your opinion of the war?
I thought that the war was very ill-founded. The president at the time wanted colonization, and he was trying to take California into the United States. It was a war that I felt was beating up on a much smaller country at the time. I fought. It was my first time in combat. It was the first time I saw the ravages of warfare. I was blessed to be serving under some very good officers. I learned from them. I studied their tactics. And when the time came, I felt that I showed my abilities to the best that I could. I guess the Mexican War did serve a purpose because the United States gained California and a bunch of other properties through it, but I just always felt that it was unjust.
In 1848, you married Julia Dent. Could you tell us about her?
Julia was the love of my life. She was my rock. She came from a family of slaveholders, and they owned a lot of property in the South. Julia supported me through all times. When I was separated from her, I missed her greatly. Julia is still with me on this side, and she truly remains my soulmate. I cannot say enough good things about her.
Okay, she came from a family of slaveholders. What was your opinion about slavery at that particular time?
My father was very anti-slavery. Obviously, Julia's family owned many slaves. I was more or less non-committal. I did not want slaves owned by Julia and myself. We tried to separate ourselves from slavery. I always believed that individuals should be free and that no person should be bought and sold as a commodity. It was a difficult situation, and when we got married, my parents would not even attend the wedding.
Okay, there was a time, though, when you actually did own a slave. Could you tell us about that situation?
Yes, after I resigned from the Army, I was given a slave by Julia's family. I always treated him as an equal. I just simply could not stand the fact of owning another person. So I gave him freedom after less than a year. I became more and more convinced after having an actual experience of ownership that slavery was a terrible institution.
Okay, you resigned from the Army in 1854. Why?
I was assigned to a military facility and separated from my wife. I missed her very much. It was a very boring existence. And I must admit that alcohol entered my life. My commanding officer realized that I was having a bit of a drinking problem, and he told me that he felt that I should resign from the Army because of it. I told him that if I could not control my drinking, that I certainly would resign. I realized that it was becoming a problem, so I did turn in my resignation as I promised.
So how did you earn a living after you resigned from the Army?
It was very difficult. We tried different things. I tried farming. Farming was very difficult for us. I even wound up trying to sell firewood at one time. The period from my resignation until I went back into the Army was a very difficult time for Julia and myself. There were times that I really had a serious problem supporting my family.
So what did you think when Abraham Lincoln was elected president?
I knew that Lincoln was a strict abolitionist, and I knew that the southern states would react very badly when he was elected. I thought that he was a good man. I'd been familiar with his name and his reputation. I felt that he would be an honest person as president. I was actually quite pleased when he was elected.
What happened after the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter?
Well, all hell broke loose. Once the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter, both sides began to raise large armies. I know in the beginning everyone felt that it would be a very short war. I know the Union felt that when they fought the battle at First Manassas, that there would be an easy victory. The Confederates felt much differently, obviously, and gave the Union Army a sound beating at the first major battle. When war was declared, I tried to rejoin the military, and I tried to get an officer's rank in the Union Army so that I could fight to protect the Union. I had trouble in the beginning actually getting a military position. I was given a job where I acted as a quartermaster and did a lot of planning. I was given a regiment to train. They were very difficult in the beginning, but they did respond to military discipline. And once the commanders realized that I did have certain abilities, I was given commands, and I became very active in the Western theater of the war.
Your victory at Fort Donelson was the first major Union victory. How did your commander, General Halleck, react to that victory?
He was very upset because I was getting the publicity for what took place, and he resented the fact that I was a rather effective officer and that I was a person that would not run from a fight.
In April 1862, the Battle of Shiloh resulted in almost 27,000 casualties, the most in any battle to date in the Civil War. It also ended the Confederacy's hope of blocking the Union's advance into Mississippi. The press accused you of being drunk during the battle. Was there any truth to the accusation?
No. I always made a point that when I knew that my boys were going to be fighting, that I would stay away from alcohol because I knew that my mind had to be as sharp as it could be, because a bad decision was always paid for with loss of life.
In spite of your victory, many sought your resignation. Why?
There were many in the top command that did not appreciate what I was accomplishing. The newspapers had used my name in connection with the first major victories that we had. The general officers were jealous. Keep in mind that this was a time that many of the officer appointments in the Union Army were political appointments. We had many general officers that were not qualified to lead the men into battle. We also had commanders that did not want to fight until they felt that they had overwhelming superiority of numbers and that the men were well trained. President Lincoln liked the fact that I was not afraid to fight and that I would fight and would pay attention to the circumstances, and that I would generally come out victorious.
Could you tell us about your General Order 11?
That was a mistake. I felt that there was a group of people that were Jewish that were making money off of the supplies that were being furnished to the army. I suspected that members of the Jewish community were spying for the Confederates, and I issued a general order that the Jewish community would be required to leave the area that we were in. President Lincoln did away with my order, and it was something that haunted me through my entire political career.
On July 4th of 1863, Vicksburg surrendered to the Union forces, and the Union forces were winning at Gettysburg. The Secretary of War Stanton suggested you be brought in to run the Army of the Potomac. Why did you turn it down?
I felt that it would interrupt the training and chain of command of the Army of the Potomac at that time. I also knew that there would be a lot of resentment towards me personally if I came in and assumed the command. The Army of the Potomac had not been performing well and had been losing many battles. And to be honest with you, I would have rather stayed with my troops because I knew who I was commanding and I knew they would fight. But obviously there was a time that I relented.
In March 1864, Lincoln promoted you to Lieutenant General, giving you command of all Union armies. How was your relationship with Lincoln?
I thought that Abraham Lincoln was one of the finest individuals that ever lived. He was honest. He was trying to save the Union. He knew that if the Confederates won, the United States would never be the same again. He was a person of high morals, and he was not afraid to make decisions. I knew that he was having many personal problems, the death of his son. Much was going on in Lincoln's life, yet he fully dedicated himself to preserving the Union.
In 1864, you engaged the army of Robert E. Lee in a series of battles referred to as the Overland Campaign that resulted in the end of the war at Appomattox. It was a long and bloody campaign. Tell us about the Battle of Cold Harbor.
Lee was a very effective opponent. We were fighting a series of battles, and I was trying to drive him back towards Richmond and Petersburg. Cold Harbor was a major road intersection, and the Confederates were attempting to preserve the battlefield there. I felt that Lee had not been able to concentrate his forces. My information that I was receiving was not accurate. Lee had actually brought in reinforcements and had built fortifications in the area that I thought was the weakest. I sent a major charge towards their lines, and we were soundly defeated by the Confederates. We had many of my boys that were killed and wounded. It was a terrible decision that I made, and it was truly, I think, the worst decision that I ever made during the war.
Would you tell us about the Battle of Crater?
As we approached Petersburg, the Confederates had built very strong fortifications. We had soldiers from Pennsylvania that had been miners. And they came to me with a plan that they would mine a shaft underneath the Confederate line, that we would fill the mine shaft with gunpowder, and that we would explode it and blow a hole in the lines, and that our forces would attack, and we would have this huge success. Well, we blew the gunpowder, and we created this 30-foot deep crater. All of the Confederates that were above the mine shaft were destroyed. But they rallied, and they made a defensive line around the edge of the crater. Our boys charged into the bottom of the crater without ladders or pre-planning, and what should have been a great victory turned into a sound and resounding defeat. I wish that I had never been able to have been talked into the scheme of attempting to mine under their lines.
Hey, when you met Lee at the Appomattox courthouse, what were the terms of the surrender?
The surrender had to be unconditional and complete. But I respected the Confederates. I respected Lee. I gave them a lot of freedom. I let them maintain their weapons and their horses. I allowed them to return to their homes with dignity. I would not let my boys celebrate the victory. I tried to have the Confederate Army return to their homes with as much dignity as possible.
5 days after the surrender, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. He had invited you and Julia to attend the play, but you turned him down. Did you have any knowledge of what was about to take place?
No, I did not. Julia and Mary Lincoln were not the best of friends. I was exhausted at the time. Keep in mind that it was only 5 days from the surrender, and I had returned to Washington. Julia did not want to go on that night, and I know she had no knowledge of what was going to take place. If I'd had any hint of what was going to happen, I would have gone to it. I loved Lincoln. I felt that he had maintained the Union, and I would have died trying to stop what was taking place. But no, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen at Ford's Theater.
Was there ever a time that you did learn who planned the death of Lincoln?
There was a time after I had assumed the presidency. Bear in mind that Johnson, the vice president, took over as president. I started to hear rumors that members of the cabinet were responsible for what happened. I was not sure how to handle the information, and I really had no proof. But I was told that Stanton and Johnson were the people that were responsible for the assassination. I did not pursue the information because it was very difficult times during Reconstruction, and I feared that such a pursuit would just tear the nation apart.
Was John Wilkes Booth actually killed in Virginia?
No, he was not. His life was spared. The conspirators had captured a Confederate captain that resembled Booth. He was killed, and his body was brought back. There were no photographs of the body or records of the autopsy, but he did not die in Virginia. All right, let's break away here for a little bit, and I'm going to do a very special break tonight. General, I think you're going to recognize the song.
Return right after these brief messages.
Eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence in the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Welcome back, everybody. I know many people probably never heard that song before, but hundreds of thousands of the young men marched to that song off to battle, and it was the rallying song for the Union Army. So, Connie, let's get back to our questions.
Okay, could you tell us about the indictment of Robert E. Lee for treason against the United States?
After the war, there were many senators on the North that felt that Lee should be punished for leading the forces of the Confederacy. He was actually indicted, and charges of treason were being brought against him. Treason was punishable by death, and I knew that there was no way that he deserved to be punished like that for just doing what he felt was right. We got the indictment dropped, and Lee lived the rest of his life as a free man.
Did you want to run for president?
No. I'll be very clear about that. I did not want to run for president. But I also felt that with the terrible problems of Reconstruction, with the problems of expansion to the West, with problems with the Native Americans, that my experience would probably be best served for the country. I relented. My name was put into nomination, and I was elected by quite a large majority.
What was your plan for Reconstruction of the South?
I wanted Reconstruction to take place with dignity for the South. I wanted the slaves that were freed to be treated as equals. I wanted them to be able to vote, and I wanted to be able for them to work and support their families. There were many things that I wanted to take place in Reconstruction. There were also many individuals that stood to profit great money from the Reconstruction of the South. I tried my best to preserve the dignity of all of those that had lived and fought. There were cities that were devastated. Richmond, Petersburg, Atlanta. Many of the great cities of the South were in ashes. I knew that it was going to take a very concerted effort to be able to restore the economies of the South. There was still much great hatred towards the blacks. The Ku Klux Klan was a terrible problem. There were politicians from the South that wanted to basically go back to the old ways of doing things. So I had many ideas for Reconstruction. Many of them were sabotaged, but I did my best.
Exactly what role did the Ku Klux Klan play after the war?
The Klan tried to terrorize the ex-slaves. The politicians of the South, many of them actually joined the Klan themselves, but they used the Ku Klux Klan to terrorize, to kill, to generally disrupt the plans that we had for Reconstruction. Many of the politicians, as I said earlier, felt that they could simply return to the old ways after the war. We took legal actions against the Klan. We arrested many of them, and we tried to defend the equal rights of the ex-slaves. Reconstruction was a terrible time for the South.
Indeed. In 1872, you signed legislation creating the Yellowstone National Park, which was the first national park. Why did you decide to make this a public property?
People came to me and told me of this incredible land that was out in the West. This was a time of great Western expansion, and I could see that there were many people that would try to develop this gorgeous country. I felt it should be preserved, and I had the majorities in Congress to get it done.
I thank you for that. I enjoy our national parks big time. What was your opinion on women's suffrage?
I was always thought that women should have the right to vote. I always considered women equal to men. The fact that they were generally not as well educated did not mean that women were inferior. I also realized that with all the problems we had, that suffrage was probably not the best idea to push at that time.
What was your opinion of polygamy in the Mormon community?
I had heard stories, horror stories, of the Mormons being married to all of these young girls, and I thought it was terrible. I did have a Methodist background, and I know that many people actually feared the Mormons. They had been forced to leave. I know that Brigham Young had taken them across country and had settled them in Salt Lake City. I also knew that Brigham Young had many, many wives. I had heard as many as 20 at one time. I sent U.S. Marshals out to stop the men from having many, many wives. I had heard that they were essentially marrying children, 12, 13, 14 years old, and I thought that was a terrible thing. So I was very, very opposed to polygamy in the Mormon community.
What was your plan for Native Americans?
I had hoped that Native Americans could be assimilated into the culture of the United States. I knew that it was going to be very difficult. We had done, through the years, many, many treaties with the Indians, and we had always broken those treaties. This was a time after the war that many, many people were trying to move west. Many of the people in the South had had their homes destroyed, wanted just simply to have a new start with their families. So there was great pressure for Western expansion. I had always respected the Native Americans, and I had hoped that there would be a way that we were going to bring them into the community. I had hoped that we could preserve their ways of life, but I just knew that their time was limited.
In 1874, you allowed the Black Hills expedition under the command of George Custer, breaking previous agreements with the Sioux Nation. Why did you let this happen?
This was a time that the Western movement was getting all this publicity. It was, Greeley was talking about manifest destiny. There was much pressure to go west. The Black Hills of South Dakota were a very large area of land. The individuals had great desire to try to go into there to prospect. Gold resources had been exhausted in certain areas of California, and production of precious metals were slowing down. The country actually needed to have gold and silver because in those days we had gold was the standard. There was much pressure to investigate the Black Hills for gold and silver deposits. There was so much pressure that I succumbed to what the other individuals wanted, and we chose Custer to lead a major expedition into the Black Hills in spite of the treaties that we had with the Sioux Nation. Obviously, there were some great repercussions of that.
During your second term, the Sioux Indian War broke out with Custer's defeat at the Little Bighorn. How did that affect your policy towards Native Americans?
Once the 7th Cavalry was wiped out by the Native Americans, everybody wanted revenge. They couldn't believe that one of our greatest fighting forces, the 7th Cav, was destroyed. The popular opinion at that time was that the Native Americans should be destroyed at all costs as a payback. I tried my best to temper the reactions. I realized that Custer's expedition into the Black Hills was a big reason for what took place and caused the nations of the Native Americans to group together. It was all very sad for me.
Okay, there were many scandals taking place in government following the Civil War. Your brother Orville was involved in a major scandal. Will you tell us about that and the action you took against your brother?
My brother was actually getting kickbacks from suppliers on several of the reservations. When I learned about it, I kicked him out of the White House and told him not to come back. I was very disappointed in my brother at that time.
What were your feelings when you left the White House?
When I left the White House, I felt it was one of the happiest days of my life.
Understandable. Will you tell us about your world tour?
Julia and I traveled around the world. I tried to act as a goodwill ambassador. It took over 2 years, but we saw many, many countries and did many, many things. I think that it actually helped giving the other nations the idea that the United States was now an international power.
You were present throughout the time that our nation headed towards the Civil War. Do you think that there was anything that the government could have done to avoid the war?
I lived through that period and I watched what was taking place. The slaveholders of the South used the argument that they needed that labor so that they could survive. And they actually believed that. I suppose there were some things that could have changed, but there was so much animosities between members of the North and the South that I'm really not sure what would have helped. You have to look at the events in the context of the history of the times. Time was very difficult, and slavery had been around for hundreds of years. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. Many people knew it was wrong. But I really am not sure that anything we could have done could have stopped the war.
Okay. You died of throat cancer. Do you think it was related to your cigar smoking?
Yes, I'm sure that's what caused it. I was continuously smoking cigars, and I'm sure that that is what caused the cancer.
One of our listeners would like to know who's buried in your tomb.
My body.
Okay, that takes care of that. Thank you. Okay, you did have a very difficult passing. Would you mind telling us about it?
Throat cancer is very, very painful. And I reached the point that I literally could not eat. I would drink fluids, but basically my death was very close to starving.
During your life, many thousands of soldiers were killed following your commands. Did that have any effect on how you were judged when you arrived on the other side?
I had always tried to treat the Confederates with dignity and honor. In war, death is a necessity, sadly. I sometimes made bad decisions where many of my men were killed whose lives could have been saved. But when you are fighting to preserve a union or to help protect the poor, your actions are not held against you at time of judgment. While there were mistakes that I made that my guides pointed out to me, and they were very sad at all the death that had surrounded my life, but I was not judged harshly for it.
What do you regret most about your life?
That's a relatively difficult question. I wish that I had never smoked a cigar. I'm sure that my life would have been extended considerably because of it. I did my best. I tried to fight to preserve the Union. I did make many mistakes. In many instances, I was naive. There was much graft and corruption going on in government. A lot of it I missed that I should have seen.
We're seeing individuals destroying statues of anyone related to slaveholding. What would you tell those people?
I would tell those people that they have to look at history with the context of the times. There's no doubt that slavery was a terrible institution. If you destroy the markers of history, and monuments are meant to remind you of history, then the lessons of history cannot be learned in the future. I do not believe that the monuments of many of the individuals should be destroyed. Robert E. Lee was an incredibly honorable person. He fought for what he believed was right. Obviously, modern eyes do not believe many of the things that he fought for. I think that history should be preserved. Our history has many, many mistakes, and slavery was one of the largest of them. But people need to be reminded of these things. Future generations will not see these historical markers because they're being destroyed, and they will not understand what took place in the past.
What do you consider your greatest achievements?
My greatest achievement was saving the Union. I took over the forces and I was very successful in what we did. I think that my role of leading the Army was my greatest achievement.
Do either you or Julia plan to reincarnate anytime soon?
I am considering it, but Julia wants no part of it. People were very cruel to her in life, and I don't think she wants to go back and take a chance.
What do you think of our modern government?
I think that the animosities that are present in your modern government between the political parties are very reminiscent of what I saw of the animosities between the North and the South. We reached a point that no one would compromise, and it resulted in civil war. Well, I don't think that civil war is inevitable from the differences that you're facing. I do think that the animosities are capable of destroying the country. People learn to compromise. They need to understand the wishes of others, and they need to do what is right for the country.
Okay, do you have any more advice for our current politicians?
Compromise. Learn to compromise. That is the most important thing that individuals can do. Compromise and make laws that benefit the people, not the laws that benefit the rich or the politicians.
Sounds good. Do you have a final message for us?
Yes, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to give my opinions once more. I always tried to do what was right. I felt that preservation of the Union was a mission that had to be accomplished. If we had not won the Civil War, then the nation that you know would be much, much different. I know that there were times that perhaps we would not have had to use the brutality, but I understood that only total victory would stop the killing. I know that sounds unusual, but if we had not waged total war, the Confederates would have continued to fight for what they believed in. It was only through the total destruction of the South that we could have ended the war. Keep in mind the Confederates felt very strongly that what they were doing was right. We felt in the North that what we were doing was right. The Confederates were very strong fighters. They had a very strong belief that God was supporting them in their battles. They felt that what they were doing was right, and they especially felt that they had the right to secede from the Union. They felt that state government was much more important than federal governments, because federal governments were taking away their rights as they saw it. I lived in a very difficult time, just as you are living in very difficult times. You need to step back, and you need to elect individuals that will do what's right for the country. In my time, there were many politicians that could care less about the country. They wanted power and they wanted wealth. I can assure you that there are many people in your government and in your industries that have those same feelings. I hope that my messages or my words can help lead people to make good decisions. I thank you for allowing me to come through tonight. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you.
Thank you, Ulysses, for our history lesson.
Yes, thank you, Ulysses. As always, it's been very interesting. Okay, next week we are going to talk to the spirit of Mark Twain, the famous author. Twain was actually a good friend of Ulysses Grant and helped him write his memoirs. So this is going to be very interesting. It's going to be a little different than what we usually do, but next week it's Mark Twain. You can submit questions and suggestions for future guests through our email, channelinghistory on parax@gmail.com. My seventh book, Spirit Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirit, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. We've lowered the price on Kindle to $2.99 so that it can be made available for everyone. Signed copies are only available on my website. All of our shows are on my YouTube channel. It's in my name, Barry Strohm. Check them out. We have many, many channeling videos that you can watch. We will be back again next week. You can join us in the chat room and ask your own questions. Thank you for listening tonight.
Yes, I would also like to thank you all. Say God bless you all and have a wonderful week.
Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.